I want to talk a little bit today about active listening in the treatment of substance abuse in the context of our coursework on addiction and recovery. I recently had a chance to talk with one of the staff members here at Cal Southern who was sharing with me a story of a female CEO who apparently came down with laryngitis and discovered when she came down with laryngitis that since she couldn't talk, it forced her to listen and actually listen in a different way than she typically would. Since she wasn't going to be able to talk, she didn't have to be thinking about what she was going to say next. So she actually listened to her employees a bit differently. We'll talk more about active listening in just a moment, and experienced the difference that makes in the interpersonal relationships in the job environment. Active listening is paying attention without agenda. It's without being attached to what I'm going to say as soon as you finish talking. It involves my trying to understand what you're saying, trying to empathize with you, get inside the feelings of what you're saying. It may be repeating back to you what you've said for clarification. It's called active listening because most of us don't practice it. One of my favorite psychologists is Robert Stolorow, who's written a lot over his career on active listening in the context of counseling. And he says this, is that once we really get what a difference it makes for somebody to listen to us actively, we really won't listen to other people the same way ever again. And I just add to that, and if we do listen in a bad way, we won't let ourselves off the hook the same way. I frankly cannot listen to somebody and space out and be okay with that typically. I've got more conscience around that because listening non-actively actually isn't just neutral, it's actually doing the person a disservice. So I want to talk about that disservice in the context of substance abuse. Addicted clients that I've worked with over the years, more often than not, will talk about using substance to anesthetize certain feelings. And one of the primary feelings is the feeling of loneliness or disconnection with those in their environment. And I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times, that no one listens to them. And the feeling that leaves, the absence or the vacuum inside that leaves, the pain that follows in its wake wants to be anesthetized. To the extent that we don't feel listened to, don't feel heard, is the extent to which we may feel a hole inside that we want to fill, and substance is one way of doing that. The example comes to my mind of Twinkies, is that as with substance, so with Twinkies. I can actually eat Twinkies for a certain period of time and receive modest nourishment. In terms of a long-term proposition, it's probably not the wisest source of sustenance. Drugs are similar to this, is that drugs and alcohol can fill that hole that I mentioned earlier that comes from feeling disconnected from others, but as a long-term antidote to those feelings probably doesn't work out so well. I actually heard somebody one time who said that substance abuse, drugs and alcohol are a poor foreign substitute for intimacy. And it makes some sense in this context. I think this is one of the reasons for the success of 12-step groups in treating addiction, is that you have people in a group setting who aren't allowed to crosstalk. They actually have to shut up and listen. They have enforced laryngitis, and so there's a greater probability of them listening to what you as a speaker are sharing. Not only do they share your experience in terms of being in recovery themselves, but they're forced into a position of maybe being more likely to actively listen. And as with Robert Stolorow, I believe that active listening actually is curative. It's the means to healing. In some ways, it would be the goal of healing. If I can get to a place where I can be not so self-absorbed, where I can actually actively listen, that would seem like that would be the goal of counseling as well as the means towards that goal. One final word is that our attempted solutions, like with the example of Twinkies, our attempted solutions unfortunately become part of a greater problem. And so you get this kind of negative, maladaptive spiral that goes on for those that are addicted. And you can see that one of the beginning points for it is in not feeling heard, but the more that I'm addicted, the more that I'm using, is the less capable I am of communicating clearly, much less receiving communication. And in fact, I'll drive people away in my intoxication. And so, unfortunately, it's like the poor get poorer. That's all for today. Thank you.